ahead and dive into the reason that we're here and talk about the last 2 episodes of season 1 of Marvel Studios animated series X-Men 97. We've obviously been reviewing this each and every week, and these final 3 episodes are a 3-part finale. And we already talked about Tolerance is Extinction Part 1, and we're going to talk about both episodes 9 and 10 today, which continue the rest of that 3-part finale. We're going to dive into spoilers and go by each episode and talk about, of course, all the big moments and all of the things that occurred in spoilerific detail of these past 2 episodes. But before we do that, we just, want to start and share our thoughts, our immediate reactions, and how we're feeling about what we saw out of these most recent 2 episodes, the final 2 episodes of the season. So, before we dive into spoilers, man, what are your sort of quick, big picture thoughts about episodes 9 and 10 of X-Men 97?
9 in particular, man, I think was just a pretty decent penultimate episode to the season. There was a ton going on, especially towards the end, a lot to chew on, a lot of action and a lot of story beats that just make things so interesting. I think, coming into the end of the season. And so it's just been a wild ride. And I think by the end of 9, I was like, the way it ended, I was like, is this what we're doing? Like, is this really where we're leaving? It almost feels like it just cuts off. You know what I mean? Like, oh, wow, that's really where we're going to leave things. But a decent episode overall. Not mad at it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a lot of really crazy, nerdy things going on in episode 9. Episode 10. Oh, man, I really do think they stuck the landing, man. And overall, I'm very proud of X-Men 97 for existing, but I'm proud of Marvel for being able to, I think, to execute the show in such a way that felt, I think we all had hoped for, right? Like the success of this show. We all love X-Men, but to see it look like this, to see it take shape like this, I love being able to feel like I can not only subscribe to the show, but subscribe to the vision that the show perpetuates, man. I think it's a really, really good job. Well done. I think we resolve things. I think one of our worries was like, is the cliffhanger going to be too cliffhangery? I think it's kind of perfect. I think we resolved one story and opened up a whole nother can of worms kind of type thing. And I think they did that very well, particularly the storylines they're going to go into, which I'm actually really excited about. If you know me, I know what I'm talking about. But man, I'm just happy that they ended this way. And we're here, man. We're here, and we're part of an X-Men's, to me, officially here in a new age. So yeah, I'm very happy in the way things ended with X-Men 97 season 1.
So these final 2 episodes of X-Men 97 for me are everything that I wanted and more. I think they are both absolutely extraordinary additions to what's already been a really, really spectacular season of television. With 9 in particular, what it did for me was kick everything into high gear. It refocused the main conflict at hand. It certainly went back to the roots of, I think, what we know X-Men to be and the primary characters that we tend to focus on. My big issue with episode 8, which was the beginning of this 3-part finale, was sort of the truncated backstory of the villain that was revealed towards the later end of the season. I felt like that was a little bit clumsy. And if I'm just being honest, these final 2 episodes, while that person is still certainly a major, major factor, it's not really about him. It's about many of the other characters, which has always been what I've wanted to focus on. I think that the show is the most interesting when we're focusing on our primary heroes and the characters that we've had a relationship with for many, many years now. And I think episodes 9 and 10 are just absolutely spectacular. It's the best case example of what Marvel animation could be moving forward and just everything that they can tap into, because they've done so much with this sort of proof of concept in the series in saying that, hey, not only can we take something and give you great nostalgia, but we can still make it its own journey. We can have this show have its own identity. We can create a new fan base and get new people very interested in these characters that we've largely not been able to touch for a decade plus at this point. And this being their first true introduction in the MCU and seeing what they've done here, the bar is ridiculously high for when that live action X-Men movie comes. If you ask me, I think that they They have absolutely blown my expectations out of the water. I think that they've blown a lot of people's expectations out of the water, just with the characterization, the expansiveness of this universe, the incorporation of other stories and other characters. I've certainly had some hiccups and some nitpicks here and there, and I'll revisit those as we get deeper into the conversation. But they absolutely stuck the landing. This is just phenomenal television. This is some of the best produced work that we've seen out of Marvel Studios post Avengers Endgame. Like, this is up there for me in the echelon of Spider-Man No Way Home and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, those projects that we still praise to this day as being like the best work that they've done post Avengers Endgame. This is absolutely in that conversation now. What they've done here is just so tremendous and just such a spectacular showcase of what's possible and what you can achieve in animation that's, largely untapped in what we can do in live action movies. The canvas and the sky is the kind of, I think it's kind of the limit here for what they'll do in the future. I just want to ask you before we dive into spoilers, though, at this point, now that it's all wrapped up, we have the conclusion. And based on everything that we've seen out of the season, it's a pretty big question. But do you think that this is the best adaptation of X-Men that we've seen thus far in any other medium? Removing the comics, of course, but when you talk about adaptations into movies and video games and animated shows, do you think that this is the best that we've seen out of them?
I can't give it that yet, but I think it has the potential to be. And the reason I say that is because it's just one season. You know what I mean? A lot of the other X-Men shows we've gotten have been just more than one season, and they've kind of either went up or down, depending on, what happens. We only got one season. Is this season absolutely fantastic? Yes. Do I love it? Yes. But I want to see another season. Give me another 1 or 2 seasons, and I think I'll be able to give you a better answer. Because I do love those other shows. I do love the original X-Men animated series. X-Men and the Wolverine Wolverine and the X-Men is good. I talk about Evolution on the show all the time. That was like my X-Men Holy Grail for a little bit. And so I do want to just hold on to it for a little bit, but I think if they can do what they just did a couple more times, to be honest, I don't even think it'll be close. Like, that's the thing. Like, I don't even think it'll be close, but they have to maintain their momentum. And so, I think that's how I feel.
I know recency bias is a real thing, and I'm acknowledging it here and now, that it is a real thing. It is not fake and made up, that exists. I'm ready to call it now. I'm just being honest. I'm ready to call it that this is the best we've seen the X-Men outside of the comics. I just think that when you look at the character development, when you look at the emotional stakes, the dark turns that this took, a lot of the places that these characters went, which at times were unexpected, even though they were pulling so much from the comics. They were absolutely staying true to many of these story arcs that they were developing at a very rapid pace at that. But some of the unexpected turns that I did not see coming were welcomed, and some of the surprises were welcomed. And again, just the integration into a larger universe and showcasing how the ramifications within this show are wide-reaching. They're far-reaching, and they impact everybody. And just those moments that I think about, the Genosha episode and the stuff that we've seen out of Magneto, the stuff that we've seen out of Jean Grey and Rogue, like, there's just been so many incredible moments that even with those other shows, I love Evolution. I love the animated series, the original animated series. I don't think we ever really got to the dramatic weight of what we're experiencing now. And a large part of that is just due to the benefit of evolution with how shows have progressed over time. We take TV a little bit more serious now than we used to. And it's definitely considered a more dramatic medium, whether it be in live action or in animation. And so I think that, it certainly has that benefit working towards it. Whereas those older shows were largely, I think, geared towards younger audiences. They were mostly made for kids at that time, which is totally fine. But man, what they did in this first season, even if it somehow falls off the rails in the future, which hopefully it doesn't, I'm still just going to look at this standalone sort of isolated season as like a remarkable achievement of what they've done here. It's just really, really phenomenal. And so I'm going to go ahead and say that it is, but I think you have a good point. I do think you have a good point, though, that there is stuff still to be proven and there's stuff still to do. But let's see how long it takes. Let's see how long it takes for them to really etch their name in the history books and make this, I think one of the most satisfying and one of the best adaptations of any comic book, that we've seen in animation or live action. So we'll certainly see. But folks, with all of that out the way, we're going to go ahead and dive into spoilers for both episodes 9 and 10 of X-Men 97. So if you've not finished season 1, if you've not caught up, definitely go do that right now and come back and finish out the rest of our conversation. So we'll start off things with episode 9, of course, which is the second part of tolerance is extinction. We're basically sort of in the aftermath of seeing the chaos that's ensued because of Magneto's sort of worldwide EMP that he's activated. That's just really leveled the Earth, and it's sort of put humanity on the brink of extinction at this point. Like, things are really, really dire. It's a world event. It's a really traumatic event, and the X-Men have to come together to figure out how to combat this. But first, before all of that really gets into play, I think we get an appropriately timed conversation between Cyclops and Xavier, because Xavier is back. He's made it back from the Shi'ar Empire. He's here to help and here to figure out the situation. And Cyclops has to confront him about just everything that's taking place. The fact that, Xavier, when you left Earth, you left us in the hands of Magneto. And now look at where we are now. He is once again the formidable foe that he's always been to us for years and years. And so it's kind of funny how things come back around. But basically they go at it, and Xavier tries to make points that he wanted to basically allow Jean and Cyclops to live free without the sense of obligation of being a part of the X-Men and leading the X-Men. But Cyclops is like, well, hey, we can make that decision for ourselves. You shouldn't make it for us without our input. You didn't even talk to us. They go back and forth, and I think both sides make some interesting points. But how do you feel about this conversation and just the overall dynamic of what's been building for all these episodes, knowing that Cyclops is going to have to let off this information and let off his feelings towards Charles' decision?
One of the things I've been learning about just recently in life, not to get too deep, but when it really does come to, I guess, the concept of love and what love is, I think one of the most important pieces that people always forget or undermine is consideration. I think that's such an important word and thing that I've been trying to get into my vocabulary more so I can circulate it in my head more. And I think Cyclops is trying to tell Professor X, like, did you consider any of us realistically? You know what I mean? And so he's, like you said, Professor X has been gone. You gave Magneto the reins. What is going on? Did you consider what is happening or what could happen with your actions? And Cyclops is getting in his ass in all the right ways, though, right? You can't start a revolution, become the face of that revolution, and then dip out. It don't work like that, Playboy. It just doesn't. Like, you are now the face of the revolution. You can't disappear and expect people in return and expect people to be like, all right, welcome back. It simply doesn't work like that. Not only that, but when you brought in these kids, when you bring in Jean and Beast and Angel and Cyclops in their these very young years, you now have taken them under your wing to now become part of that revolution and expect them to not do anything, right? Like you said, Professor X was like, oh, I just wanted you and Jean to kind of have a baby and not have to worry about everything. That's not the revolution. You shut up, bro. That's not what we're here for anymore. We have bought into your idea, and that does benefit us, but we have bought into your idea, and now you're asking us to just abandon it because you left. It doesn't work like that. And so I really love the conversation that they were having. I thought it was well needed because Professor X, one thing, if you're new to X-Men, if this is your first time watching the X-Men show, Professor X be wrong all the time. Like, this dude is not perfect. And I want people to get that twisted. He is a leader, yes, but he is not a perfect leader by any means. And I think this conversation was a very good example of how Professor X can sometimes, again, undermine his students. Because think about parents and their children. Sometimes that happens to us as once kids, man. You get undermined by your parents. They don't listen to you. They don't consider you by listening to you. And that's exactly what this is. So I thought it was an amazing conversation.
Look, Charles has been moving crazy for a long time now. Let's just call it what it is. The guy has been doing some very questionable stuff. I was calling it out weeks ago when we saw him with the Shi'ar Empire living like a lavish king. It's like, my guy, it's a lot of shit going down on Earth right now. You left the X-Men, your X-Men, to one of the most fiercest adversaries. Yes, you two have a relationship and you go way back, and you've always fought to see the good in Magneto. And that's understandable because you have that long-standing relationship. But you have put them in a situation in which they feel compromised, they feel confused, they're without leadership. And we saw that the result of those actions left the team very disjointed and left them almost directionless for a very long time. So much so that now Magneto has come back to the surface and back to the forefront as being potentially the biggest threat to all of this. forget Bastion, forget Mr. Sinister. Obviously, they're still there and they've set a lot of these events in motion. But when Magneto was pissed and when he's ready to just shut shit down, he shuts shit down. That's what he's going to do. He has the capabilities of doing that, which is where we're at right now in this episode when we're talking about this worldwide blackout that he's basically caused. Like, things are very, very dire. And so I think that that's just like another way to re-examine the way that he's moved and how he's, sort of carried his actions throughout the course of these two shows. And he's had those moments of reflection, and ultimately he came to his senses by the end of that episode where we were reintroduced to him to say, like, yeah, I need to get back to Earth. They need me. I know that they need me, so I need to come back. But at the same time, sometimes it is like too little too late. Gambit had to die for things to feel this dire. And Rogue is at her lowest point and potentially feeling betrayed and feeling a big sense of distrust. There's so much stuff that's going on that's just caused this rift between the entire team. And so I think the conversation was very much needed, and Cyclops had to let him know, like, this is not necessarily the right way to go. We trust you, but this could have been done better. And I think it's unfortunate that the conversation didn't necessarily have a resolution, but I think it certainly will continue in terms of the development between their relationship and how that's going to manifest in the future. But ultimately, they have to put that aside for now because things are very, very urgent, and they have to reconvene with the rest of the X-Men. They come up with a plan. Basically, they're going to split into two teams. They're going to do the blue team and the gold team. Cyclops' blue team, they're going to go to Asteroid M to try to confront Magneto, get him to shut this shit down. And then Storm and Jean are going to team up and lead up the gold team. And they're basically going to go find Bastion to try to defeat him in the Galapagos Islands. And so this was a really cool moment. I thought just like having them all together, we wondered about this last week, but just having them all together in one room, strategizing, coming up with just a way to figure the situation out, and understanding that there's multiple threats now at play. We have to deal with both Magneto and Bastion, so we got to split up. That's the only way we're going to be able to get into, solving all of these issues. But first and foremost, I want to start with that confrontation that takes place on Asteroid M, which is kind of a big moment that this made its debut in this first season this way. Asteroid M is obviously big integral storytelling to the X-Men and to the Magneto character. And basically Magneto and Charles, they have their first interaction in who knows how long, where they basically have it out with each other too. And Magneto was like, yeah, man, I tried your way. We did it this way. I really tried to get down with your philosophy and be better, but look at what that's got us. Look at where we are now. And so he wants to establish the safe haven. He wants to establish a new society on Asteroid M and allow anybody to come with him that he wants, that wants to, in order to be safe and to ultimately reign their dominance over the human race. Really, that's what it's all about. He knows that they're genetically superior to humans, and so he wants to make sure that that is known and that they showcase that. They showcase that they cannot be fucked with in any form or fashion. And then we ultimately see that both Roberto and Rogue, who have had very much big conflicts internally with who they are and just the way that the team is moved, they both take his side and ultimately join on the side of Magneto. So how did you feel about this moment? I mean, obviously Asteroid M appearing here, which was a big moment, but then also the conversation between Magneto and Charles and them sort of reconciling and I guess facing and confronting just what makes them so different and opposite.
Magneto's thing has always been, I guess, technically Professor X too, but it's always been, how can I establish a safe haven for my people, right? I mean, Genosha is a Magneto thing, you know what I mean? And then Asteroid M, he's like, look, Genosha got blue. They're not going to reach us in space. Like, to me, that's like, you know what I mean? Part two, I'm like, okay, how can we do this again, but keep it safe? Away from humans is the answer. And so Asteroid M, like you said, makes an appearance, again, for the umpteenth time. I don't know how many times he had Asteroid M. And so it was no surprise to see it at all, but you also can't be surprised about how frustrated some of these characters are, man, especially Magneto, who, again, like you said, Professor X is gone. You took over the reins of what Professor X's dream is, and guess what didn't work? We were talking about this in episode 2 or 3. Magneto sent the people into space and he was like, I can drop y'all right now. Y'all better quit playing with me. And he's back at that moment. He's back at that moment where it's like he's done being played with. It's too much going on all the time. And I'm not surprised that Roberto and Rogue kind of enter the same phase, because the people that are supposed to love Roberto is rejecting him publicly. And the people that Rogue loved, one, Magneto is back, yes, but my boy Gambit died at the expense of a lot of the behavior of what humans do. And so it's like, heck yeah, I'm gonna go with you, Magneto, because you right now look like peace to me. You look like what could be a future where I'm not bothered by these things anymore. Of course, I'm going to go with you. And so, I wasn't surprised in those moments at all to see those two characters in particular go with Magneto. It made all the sense of the world in the world. And between Magneto and Charles, it's the eternal conflict, man. They have like, and we'll talk about it more in episode 10 as well, but they have like this ongoing, everlasting kind of love story. It's a friendship. It's a very interesting, it's a very complicated friendship, but man, when they come face to face and it's time to talk about the nitty gritty, they're always gonna pick each other apart and what they both and what each one has done wrong. But it's always interesting to see how can they come back together. And so yeah, man, it was a lot of mess going on, but it all made sense.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this was probably my favorite portion of the episode, just because that ongoing conflict between Professor X and Magneto is the core of the X-Men. They will always be the two the two opposites, the two opposing sides that anchor themselves in their differing viewpoints about the future of mutant kind. And that's really the philosophical battle between many of the X-Men, many of the mutants. Like, what does the future look like for us? What does safety and acceptance look like for us? And what does coexistence look like for us, especially if we're going to stay on Earth, if that is going to be the future path? And obviously Magneto has wanted to create his own place, his own society. And these things, as we have noted many, many times throughout the weeks, reflect larger society. They reflect our own realities that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. When you talk about people and displacement and where they should go and where they should be and creating our own things and owning our own things and safety, all of that stuff. And I just love that that is the focus once again. You know, I think in the previous episodes with the revelation of Bastion and just everything that he's been doing, there's some interesting stuff there that I do like. But for me, X-Men is, you know, mostly at its most interesting when we're coming back to this, when we're coming back to what makes them who they are. And these two opposing sides, in which you can see the merits in both at the end of the day. I think that they both make great cases and great points. But considering where we are in this series and all that's happened, and knowing that thousands of people were killed in Genosha and probably countless number of mutants were killed in Genosha, hell, you'd be hard pressed to think like that Magneto is in the wrong for how he feels, or that Rogue is in the wrong for how she feels. She has had enough. And I think the right questions are being asked, like, how many more of us have to die? How much longer do we have to go through this before we're willing to step up and do something about it? Which often means that we have to do it by force. We have to do it aggressively. We can't ask, like, we can't try to work with people and work with presidents and all that other shit. We got to do it on our own and showcase, like, no, we run this because we are genetically superior. And I think it's a worthwhile question and thing to explore, which they've been doing in the series. And so I love this whole interaction and just visually what it looked like as well. Like to see Magneto float in the sky like that with Asteroid in behind him, and it was thundering and lightning. It was just a really ominous image that I think certainly set up what the finale was going to be and just all of the imagery there. But I just even love the visual differences between where we're seeing Charles in this moment looking up at Magneto and then Magneto looking down on the rest of the mutants, because he's ready to just leave this place and ascend to a higher level, ascend to a place that is, I guess, when you talk about hierarchy, is above humans at the end of the day. Yeah. So I just love that they made that visual distinction there. Outside of that, the other team, the team with Storm and Jean, they go to confront Bastion. Big fight breaks out. They battle, you know, a group of his Sentinels. They battle him, but then also Sinister battles Jean one-on-one. This is like a moment for them to show down, and we know that they have a lot of history. Sinister is obviously responsible for the cloning of Jean Grey, the creation of Madeline Pryor, and that's kind of been the crux and the conflict that Jean has dealt with all season. Just this crazy information that was revealed to her earlier in the season, that there's a clone of her out there that's been living her life. And so they have it out with each other. They fight and they go back and forth. And out of desperation, she tries to send a message to Cyclops, a psychic message. And Cyclops is able to see what's happening when they're battling Bastion. And then apparently, you know, it looks like everything is like in a very, very bad state of mind because they lose a connection. So for a second there, it looked like Jean might have perished and she might have died. We know that that's not the case, but it was a big battle here, a big showdown that they had. What did you think about just this whole sequence of confronting Bastion, dealing with everything that comes with him, sort of that that backstory and that exploration of his mother as well, which was also sort of brought back up here. But then, of course, Sinister making his presence known and battling Jean one-on-one for the first time.
Yeah, there's actually a lot in this season just dealing with motherhood. It's funny because it is kind of outside of Gene a little bit, right? They do talk about Bastion and his mom a ton, and so yeah, it's kind of been just an interesting thing to watch. I think, and how Jean is able to, I guess, wrap her head around everything that's going on. I ain't gonna lie, she's like, Jean always has been to me one of the, of course, physically, X-Men wise, power wise, she's one of the strongest X-Men there are. But I think the ability, even beyond that, to wrap her head around everything that's happening around her is always so impressive to me. It's like you're doing so much all the time. It's kind of it's really crazy. And so her confronting Sinister, I loved it. Like, of course they would have a confrontation. I wish like Morph got more involved with Sinister. I think they needed like one more moment, you know what I mean? Because Morph has kind of like taken a little bit of a backseat, but I thought he could like face off against Sinister a little bit more. But yeah, man, I think the face off between him and Jean, it just makes sense. And I love the way everything looks too. Like Sinister and Jean have very different, I guess, just the way they look. They have very different looks and energy. So when they come together and they're fighting, it's like, what is going on my screen? It's beautiful and colorful. And Mr. Sinister has that voice that's just like weird and robotic. It's just like, oh man, there's a lot happening here, man. And then everything with Bastion is also just cool. Like the dude, he of course he is like, up, Bastion, what's going on here? But at the same time, it's really cool to see how they make him look too mechanically, just like different from any other mechanical villain that we've seen. How do we see like this cyborg being fight other people or control other people, or how he manipulates Sinister? It's just been, I think, a really cool sight to see how they make everything look on screen and how they make it comprehensible. To be honest, a lot of these characters are hard to like come across, right? Like on paper, you're like, what is happening? I feel like sometimes I'll read the comics. This is why I love animation. Sometimes you'll read a comic or a manga or something, you'd be like, what is going on here? Like, you can't really put it, you know what I mean? The panels don't always make sense, but when it comes to screen, you're like, oh, that's what's happening. So I think they've been doing a really good job of making it look good and making it look comprehensible when, again, so many different people are like fighting in a sequence like this.
Yeah, I pointed it out earlier this season, but I feel like you can easily tell that the creators behind this show are huge fans of anime, because I feel like the way that they construct and depict their action and the colors that they use and the close-ups that they use, like it's very heavily influenced by anime, and it came back in full force in this episode and in episode 10, where I'm like, oh yeah, these guys are fans. Like they're definitely trying to create a unique style, which is blending with the more traditional American style that was established for the show in the 90s, but obviously, you know, doing a little bit more to evolve it and to grow it. And so all of this stuff looked great. We got more Smash. You know, he turned into Hulk for a quick second. That was really cool.
That was tight.
I like that moment a lot. Anytime Morph can just like turn into anybody random, that's like a really cool moment. But yeah, it all made a lot of sense in terms of like where the characters ended up, and the fact that Jean had to confront Sinister because he singles her out. But you know, these two have beef with each other. They have a lot of history, a lot of shared history that had to be dealt with. And so this was just like a great chaotic moment, in addition to the other great chaotic moments that were already happening. Because outside of this fight, we see that on Asteroid M, you know, Xavier is now trying to take control of Magneto's mind. That's the one way he can shut all of this down, is to just like hit the red button and say, like, I got to hijack his mind at this point in order to stop all of this, because Magneto was not budging at all. But Magneto, using his helmet, is able to block that out. But eventually the helmet is able to get off of Magneto's head. And now Charles is going to try to take advantage of that. But Magneto switches up the whole scenario and puts the helmet on Charles's head, which blocks his powers. And so there's a lot going on here that distracts Magneto. And then ultimately from behind, Wolverine comes and stabs him in the back with his claws, seriously injures Magneto. And for a second there, I think a lot of us thought like, oh my God, he might have just murdered this guy, because that looks like a pretty devastating wound that caught him completely off guard. Well, Magneto just went completely nuclear on Logan and rips the adamantium out of his bones, which is essentially what they show at the end of this episode, a 1-for-1 recreation of the comic panel when that moment happened. Yeah. I think it was in the Fatal Attraction story in which that happened. It was a crazy moment then, and it's an even crazier moment to just end an episode on, because that's the last visual you see. It's horrific, it's graphic, it's super violent, it's shocking, and it comes like literally out of nowhere. I just did not see this moment coming, but it was just such a crazy visual to see like how far things have gotten for everybody, how desperate everybody is, to which now like we're committing acts of violence against each other, which I think for a large part of what we've seen out of Magneto, that's like one of the pillars about his character that he ultimately upholds, the fact that he won't really commit mutant on mutant violence. Like that's not what he's about. He's about the saving of his race and the protection and the safety of his race. But this is a moment in which he strikes back, because his life it's on the line at this point, and he does probably the most horrific thing that you can do to Logan in that moment, and just take out everything from his bones. So how did you feel about just how everything wrapped up here, and of course just that final shocking moment that concluded the episode?
Yeah, I think what also ramps this up, and I forgot to talk about it, is right before we're looking at like Cable is like blasting Jean as he's being mind controlled by Mr. Sinister, and it looks like she's going to die. Like her son, quote unquote, we don't know, kind of ish, is about to kill her, and it looks like she's losing. She hits up Cyclops, and real quick, like, I might be out of here, and then we switch back, and it's like, what is going on? And so it makes this moment even crazier, because it's like, are we like about to lose for real? Like, we're about to lose like on so many different fronts. Magneto's going absolutely nuts, and it's time for Logan to take action. And the thing is, I feel like this couldn't have been anybody else but Logan to do something like this. Logan's gonna always do the hard thing. You know what I mean? He's the most, he has adamantium in his body. He's the person who probably shouldn't be doing this at all, but we know he's the one that's going to do it. One thing Wolverine's going to do is kill when he has to, or do the, you know what I mean, the hard thing when he has to. And so it's a crazy looking moment. Like you said, it's a 1-for-1 shot out of the Fatal Attraction story. It looks insane. I actually couldn't believe they went there, to be honest. Like, this is one of the moments I was like, oh, y'all really love X-Men in this hole, because I did not expect this. I remember when we were talking about episode 8, I was like, there's some onslaughty stuff here. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't think they were going to like go that far. Like, I never thought they would actually do something of that ilk. You know what I mean? Something that dark, where first, again, you get when Wolverine first stabs him, that's a surprise. And now his adamantium's getting ripped out of his body. That's a whole other ball game. And so I just thought it was, of course it was crazy, but it was phenomenal. I was like, wow, this is the greatest X-Men things I've ever seen. I didn't think I would ever see this in animation at all. And here we are, man. It was a really tremendous moment. And other thing that makes it so scary is how many people witnessed that. You know what I mean? Everybody's in the room like, oh my God, this is really going down. One other thing I want to point out, Professor X got fucked up, bro. There's like a moment where like you can see he's like the chair is like almost like on top of him. It's so funny to me. I know it was just like, man, this dude he really is helpless sometimes.
Oh man,
but yeah,
get out of here.
Oh man, he really is helpless sometimes, man. But yeah, what a tremendous moment in like X-Men fandom. I know everybody, if you love anything about X-Men, this moment was pretty nuts.
I mean, speechless was how I felt. I had to go back and rewind those final fucking 3 minutes. I'm like, no, they did not just do that. It was unbelievable that they went here, that they went to such a dark place. It's crazy. Again, I think when you talk about fans of X-Men and fans that love X-Men, and obviously the creators behind the show loving the source material, I mean, they have just incorporated so many stories and so many moments from the comics throughout the years, decades worth of storytelling within this first season, which a part of it can be looked at in a critical way, and I'll get back to that later when we wrap things up. But when you just see these moments finally coming to life in a medium outside of the comics, and we haven't seen them happen this way before, it's just like, yeah, wow, that is impactful. That does hit you in a different type of way, especially because they built it up, I think, in a really satisfying way, because everybody is at their wit's end. Everybody has had enough. Like, the gloves are off at this point completely. The fact that Logan is even willing to make that choice to go and confront him and to kill him says a lot about where he's at. He's like, yep, nah, fuck it. This is the end of it right here, right now. We're done. We're not talking anymore. Charles is really kind of the only one. Charles and Cyclops they're kind of the only ones still trying to bide for time, still just trying to take time to figure this whole thing out. But it's not enough anymore. And people resort to their worst selves, the worst part of their selves. And we see that's exactly what happens with Magneto. He does something that is just, it's almost like an unspeakable crime that you just should not do, because now you are completely destabling and just completely powering down Logan to a degree in which makes him almost useless. Now we know he has the healing abilities, and we know he will get back to normal at some point. I think that's a large part of what his story is going to be about, moving ahead.
For sure.
But it's going to take a while. You know, when you rip adamantium out of his bones, that's a pretty nuclear option. And so it was crazy. It was just so crazy to see that. I couldn't believe that they went to that level and to that degree of violence in the show. You just really don't expect something like that. But in a show that's filled with a lot of violent episodes, you know, up until this point, a lot of violent implications, that's kind of where we're at, where a lot of the characters are resorting to that at this very moment. Let's move on to episode 10 and talk about everything with the finale here. So I didn't know what to expect in terms of where we were going to pick things up, and you know, it would kind of be almost foolish to try to predict, but they still managed to surprise me in terms of how this episode kicked off, because it appears that it kicks off with the flashback moment between Professor X and Magneto. It appears that it kicks off back to the moment that they first really met each other, and also the first moment that they revealed to each other that they were both mutants and that they knew that other mutants existed as well, and they kind of share their philosophies and their viewpoints. But in fact, it's not technically a flashback. That is a misdirection. In reality, it's Charles taking over Magneto's mind, and he's getting to the source of the beginning of the relationship so that he can try to talk some sense into Magneto while all of this shit is going down and chaos is ensuing. How did you feel about just seeing this really, I guess, tender moment between the two? Because in a rare situation, we see them, I wouldn't say necessarily on the same page, but they certainly have a friendly banter going on between each other. They certainly can talk and still have a conversation with each other, as opposed to what we saw in episode 9, where Magneto, when he's looking down at Charles, he's just like, I've been waiting to tell you this for a long time. Shut up. Like, just shut up, bro. I'm not listening to you anymore.
Yeah.
And you talked about like this kind of being a love story. I think that's interesting, because sometimes when relationships start to break down, you know, you're not willing to listen anymore. You're very much in your own viewpoints in your own ways. But at the beginning of their relationship, they were obviously still very cordial, very friendly. So how did you feel about getting back to this place that felt natural and kind of felt pure between these two?
Yeah. You know, in that same love vein, it's almost like, you know, imagine a couple loses their way, and I don't know, some rom-com out there, I'm sure, but they're looking to rekindle. You know what I mean? Like, how can we remember what we once were? And that's what kind of Charles is trying to do in these moments, is like, bro, you weren't always like this. You know what I mean? Like, you weren't always like this super, of course, you've always had that hurt in your heart, right? Based off what happened in your family, or what happened to your family and the Holocaust and all of those things. But he's trying to explain to him, like, we once had a shared vision. And if I can get Magneto to remember what that shared vision was, how we met, what friendship is, the family that we cultivated in those moments, and who we're really made to protect, then maybe I can help save everybody. And that's what this whole thing is. And Professor X is also like, look, if you don't do it willingly after we having this conversation, I'm going to jump into your mind and do it for you, which I think is another crazy concept. But I really like, I really like that they're able to do this, man. Like you said, they bamboozled me. I thought it was a flashback too. I was like, oh shoot, we, you know what I mean? It all feels like a callback to First Class, you know, the bar moment that we had in First Class. It was cool, but I love how they shake it up here and make it something else, man. But man, what, again, more really good conversations being had by Professor X and Magneto. It was, again, just a really good conversation, and one of the better parts of the episode, man. I was like, man, y'all talking that talk. It's fire. They're killing it. They were killing it.
Yeah, I think the best parts of the show have been the quieter moments, have been the drama that exists between the characters, and this is no exception to that. It's an amazing way to start the finale. It's so good to just like make this all feel full circle once again. Whether you're an experienced and knowing fan of these characters, or you're, you know, sort of first being introduced to them through this show, this is a great way to reestablish their two opposing viewpoints, but also to just remind people, like, yeah, these guys were on the same page at a certain particular point in time. They actually did have a shared vision, and it was good between them. But then they walked two different paths, which is just super critical to how we got to this place to begin with, and just everything that was being said. And I love even in the moment of this, quote unquote flashback, just looking back to the past, even in the conversation, though it was friendly and they were very much, sort of on the same page in some respects, you still saw the inception, the beginnings of their differing viewpoints. Because every time Charles would say something, Magneto would slip in just a way to counter it every single time. It was always interesting. He always had an answer and a comeback for what Charles would say about, what the future of mutant kind could look like. And one of the things that he said that was just like super, I think he definitely dropped the bar. He said, in my experience, minds are far harder to bend than metal, and that's obviously a play on both of their powers, but also like the perceived power that could be stronger might not be stronger in this case when you're trying to change people's perceptions and change people's minds and make them not fear you, but accept you. And ultimately, Magneto is of the mindset that they fear us, which means that they will hate us and that they're going to do everything that they can to wipe us out. That's what fear ultimately causes. And so it really creates this interesting dynamic and this interesting conversation. But as you were saying, to your point, it gets crazy because Charles does offer him an ultimatum. Like, if you don't bend, if you don't fold, I'm going to just hijack your mind myself. And I got to ask, like, now we are really resorting to, again, the worst solutions to these issues. I mean, we know how the episode ends and we see that, I guess technically it worked. But do the means justify the ends? Like, is Professor X doing this really right? Like, I mean, Magneto says, like, this is a violation. You really shouldn't be doing this, bro. And they've always had that dynamic between each other. Like, this mind control shit, yeah, that might be your ability, but like you were violating who I am as a person, and you were going after moments that are very tender and very, very sensitive to my life. We see the whole situation about his parents and the feelings of abandonment and his origin, all of that stuff. And so I don't know, man. What do you think about that? Do you think that ultimately what Professor X is doing here is justified, considering that the fate of the world is at stake?
Whew. Man, these are the heavy questions of why I love X-Men. Because, man, that's like the hardest question to answer, man. Because, again, on one hand, absolutely, you should not be playing in nobody's minds without permission. Again, do the means justify the ends? Maybe, probably not. Like, this is ridiculous. Why are you in here? But imagine, I don't know, just imagine, he says, like, you just declared war on all of humankind. Like, imagine we're the humans, you know what I mean? Me and you, we're the humans, and there's mutants out there fighting. We would probably want him to, like, nah, bro, take over. Like, I'm not trying to die. You know what I'm saying? like, I need you to have him not kill us. Like, that is very much a thing. You know what I'm saying? But on the other side of things, you can't be doing that, bro. And it's like, what does that sacrifice mean? I think Professor X is so frustrated in these moments, right? He said, you tore apart my X-Men. The world is in shambles right now. You did this electromagnetic stuff and the world is blah, blah, blah. And Magneto's like, he said, he had another cool line. I think he was like, evolution happens best in darkness or something. I was like, this dude is, both y'all are talking that talk. I need everybody to calm down. Like, everybody situate yourself. Y'all have too many bars. But it really is an interesting conundrum of how do you save the world and what does it mean to save the world? And the thing is about Professor X though too, he is trying to take steps to not have to do that, right? He is like, step 1, I'm going to talk to you normally. Step 2, now we might have to enter your mind. You know what I'm saying? Step 3, like, he is kind of giving warnings, so it's not completely like, oh, I'm just going to do this thing. He is going through steps, and so yeah, it's definitely a muddled thing, in something that I think we'll continue to ask ourselves with X-Men, particularly with Magneto though too. Is Magneto doing things the right way? You know what I mean? It's like sometimes I'm like, Magneto, do you have the right to ask that question completely? You know what I'm saying? So it's very good politic, and I think by both of them going on. But man, it's a hard question to answer.
Man, it was something I immediately thought about when he said, like, this is a violation. I'm like, Yeah, it is, isn't it? Like, this is
It
kind of fucking
is.
crazy.
Absolutely.
But this is the one extreme scenario in which you got to do what the fuck you got to do, and
Man.
I will take Charles's side on this particular stance. He has been wrong a lot, and we just obviously highlighted some of his flaws, but he did take some steps to try to have the conversation, to try to talk to him. But also, things have escalated extremely quickly. Like, things have gotten to a dark place very, very fast. He just ripped out the adamantium from Wolverine's body, probably like 3 seconds before we see this moment between the two. So he's like,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah, he's like, oh yeah, it's over now. It's no more talking. We're about to get down to business, and we're about to do stuff. And so sometimes the drastic course of action is the most necessary. Which
Yeah.
that's what every side in this conflict is feeling. That's what Charles is feeling. That's what humans are feeling. The president, the government, everybody is feeling like, yeah, now is time. Like, we have to. I keep saying it. We got to hit the red button. This is the moment. There cannot be any hesitation anymore. And sometimes those decisions that are made are sound, and sometimes they aren't. And we'll see that. We'll talk about that in a second with the nukes. Towards Asteroid M. Sometimes it's not a great decision to make, but you make it with the best intentions and trying to preserve humankind in that very moment. And so it needed to be done. And obviously, as we see at the end of it, the intention behind taking over his mind was done with the purpose of doing something that can ultimately prevent extinction level events. Like, that is the most drastic action to take. And so it kind of makes sense that he had to go to that place. But speaking of that, once things get just like crazy in this moment and so much stuff is happening because we get a fight again between Bastion and other mutants. Actually, we should talk about that before we get to the next part with the government and the cameos. We do get another conflict. Jean, ultimately confronts Bastion, and they have another big fight, basically to confront him and try to, end this whole thing immediately. And one of the key things that happens in this moment to really just overpower him, because he's just gotten ridiculously overpowered, because he takes Cable's arm and uses the technology to power up and to become like this ultra technologically advanced super being at this point. Like, he's damn near unstoppable. And so he's obviously dealing his damage, but Jean, she goes into her reserves and pulls out a Joker card that, again, I just did not see this coming. It was another shocking moment. We see that she still has some part of the Phoenix Force left within her. And so she uses the Phoenix Force to temporarily defeat him. And this does a couple of things. One, I mean, obviously having the Phoenix back in play is just like crazy to think about, that she was able to utilize this to her advantage. But also, I think it kind of confirms that the switching of Jean and Madeline Pryor happened after the Dark Phoenix saga, because she does indeed have the Phoenix Force within her. So that was another question that was sort of looming in the background. Like, did it even happen then? Like, how long have we been living with Madeline Pryor? But I think it confirms that it had to have happened after that, because she does still have the Phoenix Force within her. But it was a crazy moment, a crazy visual. What did you think about seeing Jean, sort of utilize the Phoenix Force to combat back, Bastion in this moment?
It didn't surprise me. I actually had a feeling, because when Jean, again, in episode 9, she hits up Cyclops, Cable's like killing her, blasting her with the craziest psionic blast you ever seen. I was like, I bet you the Phoenix Jean cannot die. Like, that's just what it is. That just has always been her. As a character, she's just been unkillable. I was like, the Phoenix is in her. She'll be back. I didn't know. I think the surprise was her being back right now in that moment. I was like, oh, you're back right now. I thought she might like pop up at the end of the episode. You know what I mean? But she's like, no, I'm here already. I have I have a little bit of Phoenix left in me. So I thought that was a really cool moment, though, because again, it was one of those things where it's like, if you know. Again, most everybody knows about the Phoenix. You know what I'm saying? But it was like really cool callback to that arc in her life. And it made her. It just reminded me how powerful the Phoenix really is. Like, everything was so easy at that point. It was like, nope, give me this. Nope, give me that. Sorry, you lose. You know what I'm saying? It was like 10 seconds of just cleaning everything up, and that was it. So yeah, I thought it was a really cool moment. I really liked it.
Yeah, it was dope. This was the moment of the episode where I was probably the least engaged, just because like, again, the Bastion stuff, it's been decent. Like, you could do a lot worse. I've just not been the most interested. All the other stuff is the most interesting to me, but when you see her utilize the Phoenix Force, it's like, oh, well, wait a second now. That now you got my attention. I'm back. I'm fully back in. It was a really cool thing to see. Again, them call back to that and to just sort of deploy that in this moment when things were in a very very dire situation. But this just really, I think, kind of pisses Bastion off because now he's going to create a new sort of extinction level event. He decides like, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and crash asteroid M into the Earth and cause this massive extinction level event that's going to wipe out humankind. So now things have really kicked into high gear because within probably minutes, this asteroid will crash into the Earth and just wipe out all of humanity. And in that moment, we get a ton of cameos from so many characters all across the world, all across the universe, really, because this is going to impact billions of lives. And so what they do here is just really kind of create connective tissue with many of the other Marvel 90s animated series that existed at that time, but then also bring in some characters that we haven't technically seen before, but they're just calling attention to the fact that they do exist in this universe. I know I'm going to miss some, but I'll just run through them quickly. We see appear in this quick montage Iron Man, Captain America, Daredevil, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, and the Dora Milaje in Wakanda. We get Silver Samurai, Omega Red. We also see Psylocke and Alpha Flight as well. And also Cloak and Dagger pop up in this moment as well.
Yeah, that was my favorite one. Yeah.
It was unbelievable. It was a little bit later when they came into the episode, but they also popped up. And then last but not least, I want to call out a quick moment of Peter Parker and MJ are watching the events unfold on television as well, which for a lot of fans wraps up a story from Spider-Man the Animated Series that was left on a cliffhanger because MJ, by the end of that series, was missing. And they could never resolve that story because the show just ended. They couldn't go back to her whereabouts, but now it confirms that he was able to save her and she is indeed alive. So, I mean, just crazy stuff. A lot of people, a lot of cameos, all sorts of implications possibly for where they could go in the future. But a lot to just point out here. Any particular favorites that you enjoyed seeing, or just notes you want to make on just all of the different superheroes and people that we saw throughout this montage?
Cloak and Dagger was my favorite, for sure, and I think it's because just the way those characters, we still haven't gotten them in the light we needed to get them in. Like I like the show that they came out with. It was very low scale, very personal TV show, but I'm like, dang, we might never see these characters ever again. And here was like, oh shoot, Cloak and Dagger have arrived. They're really cool to me. So I was like, dang, man, I hope we see them again. So that was for sure one of my favorite cameos. Along with, it wasn't only T'Chaka, it was T'Challa. Like T'Challa was next to the Dora Milaje. So it was really cool seeing both of them, T'Chaka in the old school Black Panther garb. You know what I'm saying? That was dope.
Yeah, he's the Black Panther in this universe. T'Challa has not taken up the mantle quite yet in this particular story.
It makes sense though. 97, right? I love we're moving time correctly. It's like, yeah, of course this is how it would be in 97. So yeah, I thought seeing them was really dope. The only thing I'm very interested in is seeing Omega Red and Silver Samurai again. I'm like, are we doing something with Silver Samurai next season? Like, part of me feels like maybe that's part of one of Wolverine's things he does next season or the season after that even, is like, we can't keep showing Silver Samurai and do nothing with him. This is like the second time in 3 episodes that we've seen him. So, but other than that, man, it was just really cool to see everybody, especially in that 90s look. Like, oh, this is what Daredevil will look like here. I thought he looked really dope. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, just really cool cameos. And it really is cool to see the interconnectedness. You talked about in your review of these last 2 episodes, how just the something about like the weight of the world, like seeing how all of these characters, or how X-Men 97 fits into the bigger piece while not necessarily taken away from the story of X-Men 97. I love that. This was an easy way to be like, look, y'all, this is some Marvel stuff going on, but this is an X-Men story. So I loved how they did it. I thought it was very well conveyed.
Yeah, they're the center of the story. They are the most important characters in this particular story that they're telling, and I love that they never lose sight of that. And everybody else is ancillary, supporting, but still important at the same time. Because even like a cameo like Captain America, who appeared a few weeks ago, he comes back here in a different context, but in a very, very interesting context. And same thing with Spider-Man. Like, We saw him pop up in episode 8, and it was like, well, are they going to do anything with Spider-Man, or is it just like a fun way to tease him? And in fact, they did do something with him. They did something that was like super important and wrapped up a loose thread that's just been hanging out there for like 27 years now. So they did manage to wrap up something in a meaningful way. But man, I just love that the consideration of what this could mean for future stories outside of this show and for the MCU. Like, this is what's capable when the X-Men are given the platform to showcase how important that they are to all of this, to just humanity, to obviously mutant kind, and to just larger stories that they could tell. I think what they achieved here in these 10 episodes, and in particular this finale, is just it's a great blueprint for how you can make your next saga of storytelling purely mutant focused. Like I've been saying it ever since we found out that this was going to be the multiverse saga. Well, I'm like, well, the next saga has to be the mutant saga. That only makes sense. That's how you can just redirect and refocus everything on the X-Men, because there's obviously enough characters, and that doesn't mean that Avengers go away or the other characters go away. Like, now it's just about the X-Men being at the center of everything and how they impact everybody else, much like Iron Man was for the Infinity Saga. Like, everything was an offshoot or coming from the, I guess for lack of a better term, the family tree of Iron Man and Tony Stark. Everything revolved around him. That's what the mutants can be for live action MCU, and I think we see exactly what that can look like here. And so it was incredible. It was so incredible. I think the one that I enjoyed seeing the most, I just love the look of Daredevil. To what you said earlier, just like how they made him look. It was so cool.
He looked really good.
I was just like that y'all killed that design. That character design was incredible. So I love seeing that. But then also again the Peter Parker MJ moment was a really nice touch as well. But to build on top of this, though, Cap is not here for just looks and just stare in the sky. Like he has a function in this episode, because now that the asteroid is coming to Earth and humankind is being threatened with this extinction level event, the president and his cabinet, the government, decide to initiate the Magneto Protocol, which has been something in their back pocket, obviously, for a long time. When okay, if shit goes really left, and if we got to really just like do something that is the most extreme situation that we can come up with, we have a protocol in place ready to go. And the Magneto Protocol is something that they decide to go ahead and launch, which in this moment I found it interesting because T'Chaka pleads with the president, we probably shouldn't do this. Like, this is not a good idea. You don't want to do this. This could backfire. And even Cap also steps in and says, like, hey man, we don't know enough about Asteroid M. If we do this, it could backfire. Like, maybe we should just hold off and give it a little bit more time. And I'm glad that they did that. I'm glad that they had that moment in there. Do you think that, I mean, first, what do you think about this moment? But then also, do you think that obviously the president going against Cap's wishes and launching the Magneto Protocol, a bigger question is, do you think that this could potentially set up a crossover or conflict with the Avengers and the X-Men at some point down the line? Because we also see Tony Stark here, and I think that there's potential stuff that they could do there if they want to do a bigger conflict, because there's some misunderstandings happening here. There's some allegiances, and they're obviously on two different sides of everything that's happening here. Could this have maybe set the foundations for a potential Avengers versus X-Men conflict down the line?
Yeah, I definitely think it's possible. Again, given everything that we've seen, because it was very much the Avengers are present. Like, this was like the biggest Avengers, right? Again, Cap, Iron Man, T'Chaka, like they were all like, look, do not do this thing. And it's so interesting because it's so weird because it'll look bad on them, even though it shouldn't, the Avengers. But that's how these conflicts happen, of like misunderstandings. And so it would not surprise me at all if X-Men versus Avengers comes down the line. Like, I would be like, oh yeah, of course that happens. I think, of course, a couple other things need to happen. But to me, President Kelly being the reason for the conflict, I'm not surprised at all, because this dude be tearing up all the time. So yeah, we'll have to see, man. I think that's definitely possible. I love that.
I think, this is not necessarily a season 2 thing, because obviously we see what season 2 is going to be. But this definitely, I think, is something that they're putting in motion for a season 3 or a season 4, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a misunderstanding when they finally have that conversation. Like, yeah, you do have that relationship with the president. Like, yeah, Professor X is kind of the one that's mostly been talking to the president on behalf of the X-Men, but Cap is really close with him. Like, he's
Rogue already don't like him.
Yeah, exactly. Rogue already has a problem with him. He looked like a
Mm-hmm.
fucking cop in that episode. But I'm
Hey,
glad. I'm glad in that moment, and what they did here was to give him a new shade, a new dimension, to just not ultimately portray him as this good guy,
right.
as this jingoistic, soldier on behalf of the
Mm-hmm.
government. He's actually like, that's probably a step too far. And
Mm-hmm.
now we can see a little bit more of the shades of gray that exist within Captain America and how the government reacts to these situations. And so I think it'll be potentially interesting stuff that they could tap into in the future. But ultimately, they launched this. It's obviously looking very, very bad, and we see a really emotional moment that got me, because it appears that all of the X-Men are probably going to have to sacrifice themselves in order to prevent this catastrophe from happening. And for a moment there, you see all of them, sort of join forces to be prepared to destroy Asteroid M, but in doing so, they would also have to sacrifice themselves. The power, it would just be too great and consume them, which would mean the end of the X-Men. And they pulled, I think, in this moment, a great Toy Story 3 moment where it looks like our heroes are on the verge of death, like they're about
Yep.
to die. I
Mm-hmm.
believe in my heart and soul
They
that
ain't
they're
gonna make
about to
it.
die. They're not gonna make it out of this. I
Mm-hmm.
felt exactly how I did in Toy Story 3,
Yep.
but at the last moment, very importantly, we see that Charles is able to get through Magneto to some extent. I guess he's able to make him essentially forget all of the current stuff that's happening. He kind of wipes his mind to a certain extent, and to sort of reset his memories back to the foundations of where they met. And he's
Mm-hmm.
able to, tell him, like, this is who you are. This is why we're friends. This is why we're close. And that allows Magneto to just unleash his power to really just destroy Asteroid M. And in that moment, it looks like the X-Men are also like gone, but I think it's kind of insinuated quickly that they have not perished, obviously, as we see in the next few moments. But how did you feel about those final few moments? How emotional it got, and how much was on the line, for everybody involved?
Yeah, it was cracking, boy. I mean, Bastion is doing his best Ultron impression, trying to crash asteroids into the Earth. Like it's crazy, man. And I love the moment where it looks like everybody's about to gear up. I mean, Jubilee puts her glasses on. Everybody's like beefing up a little bit, like we about to go whoop ass. And then Cyclops is like, everybody stand down. Yeah, I was like, huh? I was so lost. I ain't gonna lie. I was like, what are we doing here? Are we not whipping ass? But him and Storm already knew what was going on. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is not this. We're not going to do this. We're going to do kind of the opposite of what we you think we're going to do. We're going to follow our training from Professor Xavier and go the more peaceful route and appeal to Bastion and his sensibilities and his upbringing, and tell him the truth. Your mom did not want you to be part of us. Simple as that. And of course, he doesn't believe it, so on and so forth. But I thought that was an important moment to lead into what seemed like what might be the sacrifice of the X-Men we know and love. And when Beast comes to like that light bulb moment, like we can save everybody, but we all have to work in unison. It's something about you saying that along with the talk that Cyclops and Jean have with Cable before everything goes down, of like, these people are not going to make it. Like that, I think that those two things put together is what made it the Toy Story moment for me. I'm like, y'all are telling Cable bye. Like, what is this? Y'all don't just tell people bye like this. And so that was a very special moment, by the way. He was like, I'm gonna do what my father never did. He was like, tell you goodbye. Wow, what a heartfelt moment. But man, it was scary though. It really was, especially when you see all of the flyers, Rogue, Jean, Storm, underneath the asteroid. It's like, y'all, this is really it. Like, this is, and nobody's gonna make it. And so, yeah, what a very like scary moment, because I think we've experienced loss before. It wasn't like we thought they were going to be gone forever, right? But it did feel like is this Thanos all over? You know what I'm saying? Like, are X-Men really going to die here? Like, what are we going to do if they die here? What is the next step? Is this what happens? And so I thought it was very well done. They did a good job, but yeah, it was scary, bro. I didn't think we was going to make it out.
Yeah, I mean, and the results of it's kind of a Thanos equivalent.
It's close.
It's
It's
pretty
close.
close, because
Yeah.
it puts them in places that are completely removed from our current
Mm-hmm.
timeline, and where things are left. But this big explosion happens. Many of them are presumed dead, because who would survive something like that? But we know the X-Men don't die. That's just not the case. And
Right.
even so, Bishop, he makes his return after not seeing him really at all in the show. Like he
Mm-hmm.
disappears in the first or second episode, and we've been questioning like, well, what's going on with Bishop? And it's very clear and evident he's going to be extremely important moving forward. But he comes back and he meets Forge, and essentially says like, it's not about what happened to them, but it's more about where they are and where they ended
Mm-hmm.
up. And he's like, we've done the X-Men are dead routine before. We've been here before down this road,
Yeah.
and so now we have to figure out how to save them. And ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
what we find out is that the X-Men have been split up into two different timelines completely. I mean, they're separated by like 6,000 years. It's crazy. The
That's
first
nuts.
set of X-Men are sent back to 3000 BC. It's Rogue, Nightcrawler, Beast, Xavier, and Magneto. They are back at the pyramids, ancient Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
which as soon as you see that, you know what they're going for. You're like, oh, yep, I know what that means. And then the other side of it is Cyclops and Jean, who are sent to the future into the year 3960.
Mm-hmm.
So way, way into the future. It's a desolate looking future. It looks like it's dystopian almost. And basically, in this moment, we see two very important things happen. In the past, in 3000 BC, those X-Men confront and meet in Sabanur, who we know comes to be Apocalypse. And then in the future, Jean and Cyclops, they meet a young Nathan Summers. They meet him when he's a boy. And so there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot going on here, and it points to obviously what the next season is going to be. And they certainly did not leave it for any misinterpretation, because the mid-credit scene of this episode does show Apocalypse. He's at the ruins of Genosha. He picks up, I believe it was a Queen of Hearts card, one of Gambit's cards, and he says something to the effect of "so much death," which
Mm.
could certainly illustrate
Hello.
what the future is.
Hello.
In fact, you talked about this a few weeks ago.
I called it. That's a
Um,
Desmond called it moment.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I mean, what did you think about just seeing these closing moments, knowing that the X-Men are just split up across time, thousands and thousands of years, and obviously it appears and looks that the next big bad will certainly be Apocalypse in season 2.
Oh man. You know me, bro. I was elated. I was ready for all this to go down. Apocalypse is one of my favorite X-Men villains, probably like right under Magneto. It goes Magneto, Apocalypse. And I was just excited to see what all of this meant, though, because this is such a different take on all of this. The X-Men have already fought Apocalypse in their timeline. They know exactly who this dude is.
Numerous times,
So
in fact, yeah.
numerous times. And so, it's I really don't know how it's going to go down, because after he takes that mask off and he says his name, I know they're looking at each other like, there's just no way that we got to that's what we're doing, bro. Like, we run into Apocalypse out of all people. So I love that moment, man. I thought it was really cool. But yeah, it's gonna be some interesting stuff that I think we've never seen before, because they know who Apocalypse is already. So I'm very curious of what's gonna happen on that front. In the future front, oh man, it's a summer family reunion, because it's not just Jean, it's not just Scott, and it's not just Nathan. Ascani, the woman that is there, is Hope Summers. Oh my God. I couldn't believe they went there, because that's like another corner of X-Men nerdom I didn't think they were going to touch. But here I am, surprised again. I shouldn't be anymore. Like you said, clearly the people in the show love X-Men. I cannot believe they went that direction, man. And so I think I do have a theory that, like, Hope, they said something along the lines of like, somebody pulled us out of time. I think Beast might have said it. I think it's Hope that's done it. And I think she's done it in order to fight Apocalypse. Let me put half of y'all in the past to go meet Apocalypse, but I need my family here with me. The Summers need to be here with me to understand and communicate what's going. We need both the past and the present, or in the future, to get rid of Apocalypse in this current state. So I thought it was a really good way to end things. I love the post mid credit scene with Apocalypse and Gambit potentially becoming one of his horsemen, potentially the Death Horseman. I thought that was really cool. Who knows what other horsemen he's going to pick up along the way? Maybe Polaris, who's Magneto's daughter. I think she might have showed up somewhere. It's really, it might be really cool. But man, one of my favorite villains is back, bro. And it just made me really excited. Not only that, but Hope Summers is also a really cool character that we haven't seen in this way yet. And so I'm really excited for her to be introduced as well, as a Scani. So yeah, there's a ton to think about, a ton to speculate, a ton to theorize over, but overall, man, I think they nailed it, and I think the future of X-Men is very bright.
Yeah, the inclusion of Ascani cannot. I mean, it's obviously intentional, but the fact that they were pulled out of time and the fact that it is Jean and Scott specifically in the future, it almost means that she had to have been responsible for doing that. You know, I think because who else would target those two to come to that specific time and then send the rest of them back to the origins of Apocalypse when he was still in Sabanur, and still sort of forging his path. But I mean, what a fucking ending to this.
What an
season.
ending!
It was incredible because it was unexpected because they have encountered Apocalypse numerous times, and so it was just the way that they did it. Though I think the way that they executed it was like, oh yeah, but there's still so many fresh, interesting directions that you all can take with this character that we haven't done before, and we're gonna do it in a huge, epic time travel-esque adventure. You know, where we're separated by thousands and thousands of years. So this is creating, I think, a really, really epic tapestry for what they're going to be able to play with in the next season, in addition to the Horsemen of Death, which, you know, we have not really properly seen in any form or fashion outside of the comics at this point. So the unlimited potential that also exists there, and the fact that, yeah, Gambit's going to have to come back in that form, and Polaris did indeed show up earlier in this episode quickly, which is also kind of crazy. I mean, there's just so much that they're laying the foundations for this upcoming season. We should probably point out some other things that we quickly missed. I mean, speaking of just like foundational stuff that's going to be, I think, sort of picked up in future seasons. One of the moments was Forge, you know, sort of looking at all of the missing X-Men on the bulletin wall. Many of them have the missing presumed dead sticker on them, and they made sure we didn't miss it. On that wall, you see Scarlet Witch. You see her picture, and it just says "off-world." So,
of course,
you know, that she is somewhere off-world, alive, doing who knows what.
Yeah.
But technically, that wasn't even the first moment. Earlier in the episode, it was quickly shown, like as we're looking through the visions of Magneto, as Professor X is, you know, sort of taking over his mind, and we're in the waters, and they're talking about how cold the waters are and what the waters represent. There's a quick moment where we see the silhouettes of both Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in the background. It happened super quickly, and possibly even Polaris to that point.
The Polaris was there. I think that was Polaris. Yep.
So, I mean, we're talking about all of Magneto's children.
Magneto's kids.
Up at this point. So, a lot of big Easter eggs there. How did you feel about even seeing that, what Scarlet Witch might do in the future? And I think Scarlet Witch was in the original animated series at some point, if I'm not mistaken. I think that they popped up briefly. It wasn't like super integral, but I do think that they popped up super briefly in the original animated series. But be that as it may, this is going to be major, you know, moving forward, just considering, like, I think our relationship as a fan base has changed with Scarlet Witch over the years because she's just grown in popularity, grown in notoriety. So, I mean, how do you see this all playing out?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think it's crazy. My relationship with Scarlet and Quicksilver, again, I don't remember if they showed up in the original, but in Evolution, they were important. Like Scarlet Witch and Pietro were like important in that show on two separate sides. One was in the Brotherhood, one was in the X-Men. It was a lot going on there. So I'm just glad to see them, I think, potentially coming back in that capacity, just brother and sister, what's going to go on. But Polaris, too, being as strong as she is kind of nuts. So it was just really cool seeing them, man. I don't know what path they're going to go down with Magneto's kids, but I think it'll be interesting to get him involved in that way. Like these, my kids exist here. Now? How does my behavior change knowing they exist? You know what I mean? Knowing they're in whatever particular way. So I think that's interesting. But even you talk about the board, you know, of all the X-Men that's there and all the people missing. One of the ones I seen that didn't have anything on it was Colossus, and I remember talking about like, where is Colossus? Where the hell Colossus? Colossus had nothing on it. It was just like empty. I was like, dang, where Colossus at? But I think it was important to see him though, because I think they are forming a team, right? Of course, there's like in the comics, there's like a more detective-y X-Men team. I forgot what they're called. X Factor, X something. But they're more detective-y, and Forge is part of that team. Bishop has never been, but Forge is part of that team. So I'm curious, like, what team he puts together to potentially again kind of look for their missing counterparts. I think it is important. Also, you talked about Psylocke popping up. We talked about Celia Reyes is right next to her. Those who don't know Celia, she's like Puerto Rican and black. She like she like shields herself like with a bubble. That's what she does. What's funny about Celia, she actually like doesn't do the superhero shit. She's just only there when she gotta be. Like she doesn't want to be superhero at all. So I think that's funny. But I think that might be the team. You know what I'm saying? Like they might be like forming quote unquote the new X-Men in order to go find their counterparts. Because the only other person for me personally that's missing is where the hell is Bobby? Where the hell is Iceman at, bro? That's one of my favorite X-Men.
For weeks now.
That's one of my favorite X-Men. And this nigga is still missing, bro. He's Omega level. We don't have a lot of Omega level mutants. You know what I'm saying? They need him. He's important. So yeah, it's just great. I think they're gonna form another team around that. So yeah, I really like that detective thing they might be going down. It might be cool.
Yeah, I mean, what it does too is it gives more opportunity and more spotlight to other mutants that just have not gotten that. I think this season we obviously had to really reorient and reset the major players, all of the most well-known X-Men, which they did a great job of, while still also, allowing some others to get some great
Roberto.
To get some great shine. Mm-hmm. Roberto, who finally claimed the Sunspot name in this episode. That was cool.
Thank God.
Even more getting a little bit more to do. And so now the floodgates are open because we have the foundation set for Jean. We reintroduced everybody to Charles and Magneto. Wolverine will have a lot to do in the next season. He's going to have a ton to do, but it's probably going to be completely separate than everything else. I think his journey is probably going to be completely isolated from many of the other things, and maybe that's the Silver Samurai stuff that we see that can possibly get integrated. Because I do want to see him utilized more as well. Like that's a great character.
He'll be
they
around.
Can do a ton of stuff with. So.
I have Wolverine theories.
Yeah. Hey man.
I have Wolverine theories.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, because there are so many tools in the toolbox, we can have now with the second season, a third season, we can have multiple storylines and multiple subplots at play. And I think that's what they expertly set up here. And to your point of like a possible new team in the current timeline, while the other teams are in these desperate separate timelines, that's going to be a big formula I think that they utilize in the future stories that they tell. Couple of quick things. Well, I guess before I do have like two final questions, and we can do closing thoughts on this whole season. But anything else you wanted to point out about this episode? There was a ton that happened. The only other thing I really wanted to just like call out is Bastion. I mean, I've been a little hard on the character, but he did have some great moments in this episode. He was talking a lot of shit. I love just the shit talk he had in this episode. He looked at Cable and said, how many times did you fail your carbon copy mothers? I was like, yeah, wow, that fucking stings. Cable's like, 200. About 200. And then the moment he had with Jubilee before they faced off, he said, what are you going to do, slay me with the 4th of July? And she was like, I haven't heard that one before. That was a good line. He was talking his shit. I think he even called Cable a deadbeat father. He was just like going in. He called Cyclops. I think
Cyclops,
yeah. It was just like, yeah, you're angry now, my guy. Like, you're definitely letting them off. You're letting them rounds off real quick. So I liked how much they gave him to do in terms of just like being antagonistic and everybody that he came into contact with.
Yeah, no, that boy Bastion, he was going in, man. Not too much. I really like that Jubilee moment though, because I never want one of the things I think early in X-Men the animated series is Jubilee does come off kind of like Dazzler, where it's like you just kind of sparkle and you don't do much. But that moment was like. Jubilee has an arc too, and I remember after meeting her future self in Mondo or whatever, it was like, no, I could really do some cool shit if with training, you know what I mean? And it's like, in that moment, she fucked Bastion up. And I was like, we need more of that, Jubilee. Like, I love that. Like, do more of this. So I think they're finally giving her a little bit of a power boost. Especially, you can't have her like a love interest with Sunspot, who to me is like that's an A-level mutant to me. You know what I'm saying? Like Sunspot is a beast. He could do a lot. You can't just have like Jubilee take the back seat to him. You know what I'm saying? So I'm glad they're finally powering her up. One other small thing I need to call out because I think it's important is when of course Morph's been doing all these things. He turned into the Hulk. And very importantly in this episode, he turns into Mr. Fantastic really fast. And to me, this is the episode where this is Marvel saying, we got all the boys back. Like this is like everybody's back in town. This is the episode where we like, look, y'all, we got Daredevil, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, Mr. Fantastic, and we got everybody. Like this was that episode to me. This is like the look, God, we are here and we are ready to use these characters. So I really love how they kind of use Morph again for these crazy characters. Like, it wasn't like Morph was just like, I don't know, Squirrel Girl. You know what I'm saying? It was like the Incredible Hulk and Mr. Fantastic. Like these are very important characters, along with all the other crazy cameos we've seen in this episode. So to me, yeah, this is like Marvel. Like they're talking they shit of what's to come, and I think that is tremendous, and I'm really excited to see what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, what's also interesting about that is that one could imagine if they would like try something that in live action, but obviously, as we know, the benefits of animation is that there are no limitations, right. And you can do stuff like that and not have to rely on actor schedules and them popping up on set and paying them money. Like you can just do the shit. Like Mr. Fantastic doesn't have to utter a word in an animated show. That's the great aspect about doing it. That's what makes it so fun, is because it really does feel like anything is possible. You'll see anybody pop up, and it still can be surprising and satisfying in a way if the story is done well, and if the cameo or the character is introduced in a meaningful way. And even the way he utilized him here, it's like it made sense why he would use Mr. Fantastic, like why he needed those abilities to try to combat the asteroid that was going to hit Earth at that moment. So it made all the sense in the world. But yeah, a lot of great stuff here. Couple of quick questions before we wrap up. First and foremost, this season has gone through a lot of storylines from X-Men comics at a pretty quick rate at that.
Yeah.
And while I love this season, and I think it's like some of the best work that we've seen out of Marvel Studios in the past 5 years, I think one could potentially be worried at how quickly they are possibly burning through stories. Like there's decades and decades of X-Men stories, obviously, but we talked earlier about, what they did with the Madeline Pryor, Jean Grey stuff, what they did with Storm and her development, obviously Wolverine and the Adamantium moment. There's a lot of these moments of comics and stories that have been told and drawn out for years at a time in some instances. And this show pulled a lot from the Chris Claremont run, and he was presiding over X-Men for a very long time. Like he made sure that this stuff was lasting for years and years and years to really get that investment up. And I think that in the past with the original animated series, they would typically take story arcs and spread them out over multiple episodes. Like the Phoenix Saga was like 7 episodes. When they did Age of Apocalypse, that was like 5 episodes. Right. They would take their time with it. Here, it's a bit of a different time. It's a different formula with television, and they are moving quickly. Are you at all concerned that they might be burning through some of their best stories at a very, very quick rate, and that might leave us with not as much to tell in the future when we get to those later seasons?
No, I'm not. I think I feel exactly that though. I feel like, oh my God, are we moving too fast? What's happening? What is going on here? But I think they're setting up way more than they're actually closing. You know what I mean? Like I feel like everything we talked about in 9 and 10, as much as we didn't get the Onslaught stuff in this episode, right? I mean, got to wipe your face off with that. Like, everybody's like, Onslaught's coming. I think that they still have potential to do that way down the line if they want to. They set that up. You know what I'm saying? The adamantium thing, that they can use that in 3 seasons from now and be like, y'all remember what happened in episode 1 or season 1 with this and that? I think they can set that up. Apocalypse may be longer than season 2 for all we know. You know what I'm saying? Apocalypse, that's a pretty big villain. He could last past season 2. It just depends on how they want to tell it. And the other thing is something I've always wanted that we've just never done in live action because it's just really hard to do is catch up with the comics. We're still not there. You know what I'm saying? Like we still have not gotten to the point where the mutants have their own island. It's called Krakoa. Magneto and Professor X have finally come to one accord. And you know what I mean? Like we haven't gotten there. And so only time will pass until we get the second season and more story will be told in the comics by then. And so I'm not worried. I think there's a ton of really good story to still tell because X-Men really is on fire right now. To be honest, before this run, they weren't on fire like that. And this run started like 2019, 2018. And so I think there's still a lot of stories to tell. And yeah, I'm not worried yet. I think there's potential for them to be like, all right, Now y'all wrapping up too much stuff. You know what I'm saying? I was worried with Madeline Pryor. Madeline Pryor is a pretty big villain as Goblin Queen in the comics. I was like, dang, y'all did that fast. But she could always come back. Something else can always happen. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot for them to play with because X-Men is just that expansive. So we'll have to see. I'm not saying I'm completely not on the. I'm still like, I need y'all to do this right. And slow down a little bit. I do want them to slow down a little bit still, but I think they still have the potential to do it correctly and flesh out these storylines.
That's why they're not killing anybody, because they know that they're gonna
They
need them
know.
in the future. They know.
They know.
I think that's probably what is more likely happening is the fact that while they have hinted at and introduced certain stories, and we can like easily look at them and tell like, oh, that's from that one and that's from that run or whatever the case may be. It's not done. It's just like, here you go, and we'll come back seeds. To it. You know, like we're just planting those seeds now, but we will return and revisit this down the line. You just can't see it yet because we're also dealing with this other thing over here. That's what it feels like, because the other side of that is like, yeah, we're only giving one episode to the Goblin Queen, which just doesn't feel right. And if we're only going to give one episode to certain big stories, if that's going to be the formula, that will concern me, and that will make me think like, is that the best use of that very well known, very heavily praised story that a lot of people like, or I don't know, you know? And there's also like things that have not worked that they could flesh out and do more with, and kind of blow out in a big way, and try to, I think, create a little bit more adoration around things that have not worked in the past. You know, a lot of people didn't really feel as hyped about the whole Bastion, you know, stuff coming into it, but there's still ways that they can make that super, super successful in this adaptation that we haven't quite necessarily seen happen in the comics. And so I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt just because they've earned it, because it has been so good. But they always have to, I think, just sort of manage what that looks like. Like, this is a different time, a different day. We don't have 25 episodes a season. We only have 10. So how are we using those 10? Are we just like quickly running through stories, or maybe can we make some of these things stretch out a little bit more? Time will certainly tell. The other thing I want to ask though, Bo DeMayo, he's gone, as we know. He wrote a lot of these episodes. He's credited as the creator. We're sitting here praising the show as being amazing, and their main guy is no longer working for Marvel. Does that worry you that moving forward, he will not be a creative force present for the next phase of stories that they're going to tell?
I think to a degree. What's funny about Bo DeMayo, that boy has been on the internet, low-key, like, campaigning, like, just by, like, telling, I did this, I did that, I wrote this, pay attention to this in this episode. I think yesterday he did it was like yesterday night before the episode 10 came out. He did like a live with somebody else, and they're talking about the episode, but like before, that boy's been like campaigning almost to like give me my job back. That's what I see. Like when I see it, I'm like, he really wants his job back.
Well, he's also, I don't know. He might not ever get this chance again to really talk about it since they let him go, and we still don't even know why he couldn't even do press. You know, so this is also like the first time he can actually like celebrate and acknowledge the show and the work that he put in.
No, that's real though, and so it's almost like, of course, I think the saving grace is all of this is a team effort, right? There are so many people that make this show happen, and you know, there are tremendous directors that make the show happen. That's not Bo DeMayo, again, who did write a lot and produce a lot, but it's a weird situation, man. It really is. Like, I'm curious to know what it looks like without him. But he did set the foundation. But now it's like, can the team carry it on without him? I think is the biggest question. And I think they probably have already talked about season 2 and laid all that stuff out before his departure. So season 2 is not what I'm worried about. I am worried about like 3 and 4 though. Like, I don't know what 3 and 4 is going to look like. And so that's when we get to rocky territory again, because he did do so much for this first season. So yeah, I think right now, I think they'll be fine. Again, there's so many other people involved in the creation of this show, so many other people that help with make this a thing and make it as good as it is. But you have to at least side eye a little bit. Like, we don't know what happened to Bo DeMayo. We don't know why it's like this. We don't know why he's not able to be part of this team anymore. But I think it's very much normal for us to be a little bit cautionary onto what the future of the show is going to look like.
I'm gonna put it like this, and this is assuming he's completely innocent and he's done nothing wrong, because we don't know. I can't assume guilt not knowing anything. If James Gunn directed Guardians 1 and all of a sudden they just got rid of him and never told us why, and now I'm looking at Guardians 2 and 3, I'm like, I'm concerned. I'm very concerned. Yes, it's a team effort, but there is a visionary. There is a leader who has to take this across the finish line, who has to say yes and no, who has to make decisions and ultimately tell everybody what his vision is and delegate. That's what this is all about. And I think with TV and movies, it's obviously different because we celebrate auteurism in film so much, but we don't do the same for television because it's just constructed differently, and showrunners don't get as much praise as directors do in film. But nowadays, the formula is often shifted to that, where a showrunner is leading the charge. He is a director of a show, and Bo DeMayo was that person for this first season. And I agree, season 2 feels like it's mostly mapped out, and that they mostly laid a lot of that stuff down before he was let go. But I'm definitely like, you got rid of your guy who clearly knew what the fuck he was doing.
Gave y'all a banger.
I don't know what was going on behind the scenes and why y'all let him go, but he clearly did a fucking phenomenal job with the show. And so, it just leaves me questioning at who could fill those shoes. And maybe they already have somebody. Maybe it's not that big of a deal to them. And maybe he shouldn't get as much credit as we're probably giving him. I don't know. I'm not, behind the scenes in Marvel Studios. I don't know those answers, but just based off of what I'm seeing and just based on how this show has run its course and how much I love this first season, I'm looking at the future like y'all definitely got your work cut out for you. You have a great foundation, but this is not easy to do this and to recreate this magic. It's going to be almost an insurmountable challenge. So I think they have a lot ahead of them. But as we wrap up here, let's just share final thoughts and overall feelings about, again, this episode, but then overall just this season of X-Men and just what they were able to achieve and establish with this first season of this continuation of this really, really beloved show. And ultimately, possible hopes and aspirations for what the X-Men will do in this show moving forward, as we've, sort of already alluded to, but then also just like how this could potentially affect the larger MCU. We know that the mutants in live action, we still have yet to really get there. Deadpool and Wolverine is right around the corner, which by the way, Bo DeMayo confirmed that was the only mutant that he could not use was Deadpool. Which is interesting because, we're going to get him very soon here. But yeah, man, let's just close out. What are your sort of final thoughts and overall sort of assessment of X-Men 97 and what they did here with this first season?
Yeah. Childhood Desmond is so happy. I've been an X-Men fan pretty much my whole life. I always talk about, I have a comic box it's an X-Men comic box, and I only put X-Men comics in it. All of my other comics are in a whole separate box. And so coming into this show, I think, of course, I was excited that it was happening. In fact, you could go back whenever the show was announced, we talk about it. And I was like, X-Men 97, oh boy, let's do this. I'm really excited. But this television show absolutely trumped anything. It passed my expectations so tremendously that sometimes I'm left speechless because I can't believe that we've come to this conclusion and we've gotten to this point to watch something so beautifully crafted that is this TV series in X-Men 97. And so I'm very proud of Marvel and everybody involved that was able, I think, to create and to curate something so beautiful and so meaningful to so many people around the world. Like a lot of us love X-Men. It is what it is. Whether it's the movies, the cartoons, the comics, it's a part of a lot of our lives. And so I'm really happy to see that they treated it with care. And, I remember I used to talk about that all the time. Like, did you care about it? And I think that's the difference between a lot of times a good project and a bad project is how much care goes into it. And I can very much tell that care went into this TV show. So man, X-Men 97, I couldn't be more proud of what they gotten with this TV show. When it comes to the larger MCU, you said it, man, after the multiverse saga, the mutant saga is on the way. And it kind of has to be, a lot of Avengers are mutants. I'm sorry to burst your bubble in case you didn't know, but there's a lot of Avengers that are mutants. A lot of what makes up superpowers in the Marvel universe, a lot of those people are mutants. That's just how it goes, and that's how it has operated for a long period of time. And so I'm very excited to see what they're going to do, how they're going to potentially shapeshift X-Men 97's, the threads that have been sewn into that show, into the larger MCU. I think they've done it throughout the entire season. They can take anything from here and say, we'll take that and use it in the MCU. Shoot, they just got blasted to another dimension. You know what I'm saying? That's very multiverse saga-ish right now in what they're doing. They're in different timelines, quite literally. And so I think there's so much to do. There's so much ground to cover. But more than anything, what this show has done is establish mutants in the MCU. And they have done it so very well. So again, I'm proud and I'm excited, man. It's time to get down to it, because the mutants are here, and now it's time to do them justice. And when live action rolls around, I'm betting if they give as much care as they did to this show, we're definitely going to be in good hands when the mutants show up. So just proud is the best word for me right now.
Look, X-Men 97, it's a phenomenal achievement. Marvel Studios should be super proud of the work that they've done here, and we as fans should be so happy that they nailed this show and that they stuck the landing, because a lot could have gone wrong with this. A lot really could have gone wrong, especially continuing a show that was already beloved and already celebrated. But to do this and to do it in a medium that they have largely not touched in animation, and that they're starting to really dive in head first, and to see what came out on the other side of it, it's really incredible, and it's inspiring to know we are still in good hands. We're still in really good hands, especially when it comes to mutants, and they understand how important this is and how important it can continue to be for the larger MCU. But I think that the show, as I said earlier, is the perfect blend of a great nostalgia trip, but still being a completely original story for a new generation. It admires everything about X-Men comics while still also being original in its execution and its evolution of its stories and its characters. And the way that they were able to close out certain storylines and set up new ones for the future was damn near masterful. They did such a great job and did such a, I think something that we don't talk about enough is just like how hard it is to do a season one of anything. Like if your season one isn't the bedrock of all your stories, then like you don't have a show. Season one damn near has to be the best by default. Like it has to just be incredible to get people to not only come back, but to also make sure that you have the foundations as strong as they can be to build on top of that for future seasons, if this is going to be a show that's around for a long time. And so they nailed that. They did that in spades across this entire season for the most part. I love the connections to the wider universe. I love how important and central and integral the X-Men and the mutants are in this universe. I love the cameos. I love the celebration of these characters. I just love everything really about it. It is truly one of their best projects of the past few years. It's certainly one of their best since Avengers Endgame. And we live in a time where it's really becoming more and more challenging to find those things to celebrate about Marvel. And that's unfortunate, but I think that this is one thing that we can unequivocally look at and say, no, they did that. They absolutely got that right. We cannot really be disappointed or upset at the execution of this show, because wow, what a trip, what a ride, just a fantastic way to kick off this brand new series that they're going to be really dealing with for the next few years. It's obviously going to have a lot of repercussions and a lot of major consequences. So kudos to them. Kudos to everything that they did here. Kudos to the fact that they have just I think really kind of built a new animation division on the strongest possible foundation that they could have set. What if it's cool, but this is how you really reintroduce what animation can do for your entire company. And so bring on Spider-Man 98, bring on Fantastic Four 2000, bring on Incredible Hulk 1990, whatever you want to do. I'm signing up and I'm here for it, because you have proven to me that y'all are knowing what y'all are doing in this new medium. And I'm just super excited about the future and what it all may mean. But folks, with all of that said, those are all of our thoughts on the season finale and the entire season of X-Men 97. If you've checked out these episodes, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.